Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ellen Brown, author, attorney, and founder of the Public Banking Trust. Ellen, something that's really of concern to everybody, I would say North America, considering that California is really our market garden, especially for Canada in the wintertime, is that horrible drought that has plagued the state for years and years, and now you're hitting a level where people are being forced to cut back on their water consumption. But you think there's more behind this drought than just a natural cycle. Could you maybe explain?
Well, it's going into its fourth year of drought. It's very unusual, and I live here, of course, and I'm in L.A., and first of all, we see geoengineering all the time, chemtrails that are in just these strange patterns that wouldn't be made by ordinary planes. And we'll get these dark clouds as if it's going to rain, and it doesn't rain. It's very strange, which is, there's quite a bit of data showing that there are patents for geoengineering, ways of manipulating the weather, and of course they're military, and they're supposedly, if in fact that's happening, supposedly the purpose is to block global warming by putting up this sort of gray shield, but it's a gray shield of aluminum and barium, which is falling on us, ruining the art. Or I mean, if you wanted to get dark and conspiratorial, I write about this stuff. Who knows? I read it and I write it. But the conspiracy theory would be that California is the breadbasket of the U.S. I think half the food comes from California, and 80% of organic food comes from California. But if all the land is covered with aluminum, then there's no such thing as organic, which forces everybody onto GMO foods, which is Monsanto, of course. And so there's manipulation of food, manipulation of water. Water has been called the next big commodity. But what I was particularly writing about was the fact that there are alternatives that aren't being pursued. And why is that? The alternatives that are being pursued are basically shifting the water around from one place to another, or telling people they have to cut back on their showers and watering their lawns. Of course, people do overwater their lawns, but the amount of water that's actually used in the cities is quite a bit less than what's used for agriculture. Anyway, they're just shifting the water around, and not what the solution would be to find new water somewhere, and there are ways of doing that, and that's what I was writing about. One solution, of course, is desalination, and they have new techniques for that aren't as expensive. They do that quite a bit over in Asia. Another, the one I was particularly writing about, is called primary water. That scientists are discovering that there's more water under the mantle of the earth than there is above it. I saw that some Japanese researchers said there might be as much as 5 times as much water under the mantle as above it. And of course it's 500 miles down, so you can't drill for it. But there's a lot of pressure within the earth, and it pushes that water up. Water wants to go up, as you can see, like with geysers. It wants to go up into steam, and it's hot down there. So that this pressure pushes it up in crevices in the rocks. So if you can find where those crevices are, you can hit water. And there are new techniques for finding the crevices. And there's data, for example, where they would drill just 2 feet away from where somebody had drilled before and not found water, and then you find this gusher that just keeps going and going and going because you've hit that crevice. So I just wanted to make that possibility known. According to Paul Power of the Primary Water Institute, you could, for $1 billion, you could drill 8,000 wells and supply the water needs of the state, as compared to $60 billion, which is the projected cost of the Delta water tunnels, which is a big project that's now stalled because it's a matter of shifting water from one area of the delta to another, And, of course, the people that are going to get it shifted away from are complaining about it. So they're reviewing something like 30,000 complaints over it at the moment. So that'll be a long time coming at it, if at all, whereas you can put a well in 3 days and have it gushing if you hit the right spot and you know how to hit the right spot. So anyway, it's just a big problem. It's considered our number one problem right now, lack of water. So I just wanted to get some new ideas out there. It's kind of like normally I write about money and that the solution is to get more money out there, which you could do just by printing it, but actually using it for what the people need and not for what the banks need. In other words, print it and build infrastructure, put it into education, other social services, etc. And likewise with water, the solution is to find new sources, and there are possible new sources.
Why are those new sources being ignored?
Well, probably just because nobody knows about it, and that's why I was writing. But it could be, and some people think it is, because there's an actual intent to make water much more scarce and more expensive. In other words, to create a market for water, and there are all sorts of corporations that are in line there to profit off such a market. Or even arguably, if you want to get really dark, there's some people that say that there's an agenda to cut down the population, that there's just not going to be enough food and water for everyone, and so you have to find ways of basically starving people out.
Now, why would the U.S. want to do that to its own people?
Well, it depends on how you define the U.S. I mean, who's controlling? Why would the U.S. even want to go to war in the Middle East when the majority of the people are opposed to it? There's somebody controlling things that is not us, that's not we the people. That was what my latest article was on, that politicians, it was a study from Princeton University that found that we are no longer a democracy, we are an oligarchy, that our legislators are much more likely to respond to the will of big money than to the will of the people.
And what kind of a threat is that posing to the general population?
Excuse me. Well, are you talking about water or the whole political
both.
situation?
People don't live very well without water.
Right. Well, arguably, maybe it'll just drive people to other parts of the country. But yeah, and for poor people, it could result in death, and it certainly can result in sickness. For example, if they're actually dropping aluminum from the skies, aluminum is linked to Alzheimer's and autism and a lot of other conditions. It's not good for you.
Now, are there any thoughts on what's causing the California drought?
One possibility, if you want to get dark about it, is we have a drought, but on the East Coast, they're having too much water. So it's not like there's a global drought. Globally, in fact, there's too much water is more of a problem than too little water. So somehow it's just been shifted away from California, and that's also true for Oregon and Washington State. There's this a wall in the you can see it in this weather pattern where there's this wall that prevents the storms that normally brew in the Pacific. Normally they come and blow over California, but there's this wall that keeps them from reaching California. And why is that? And it's a puzzle. Nobody really knows why, unless arguably it's due to Harp, which is another military thing. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a form of Tesla energy that's used for military purposes and supposedly can manipulate the weather.
HARP stands for High Altitude Research Project.
Okay.
The excuse we're told for these high-powered antennas in Alaska is that they're trying to research what's happening in our high atmosphere, but the fear is when you do that, you're actually manipulating the weather because it starts from the very edge of the atmosphere.
Yeah. I've read a lot of theories about that, and unlike ordinary experimentation, say with a drug, where you get informed consent of a group of people who are desperate and are willing to try this drug, or even sometimes they do experiments on we know they've done experiments without informed consent on certain small populations. But manipulating the weather, nobody knows what's going to happen until you've done it, and it's a huge change, a huge potential damage. So you can see why, if in fact they're experimenting with manipulating the weather, they keep it secret, because there would be such outrage among the people. And it certainly looks to me like they actually are. I can just look up in the sky and see that something's strange going on up there.
And the U.S. naturally has the worst weather in the world if you look at all the hurricanes and tornadoes that pace the nation every year. Why add to the confusion?
Yeah, a lot of strange things going on. I mean, I've been following the research on that ever since the tsunami, the Asian tsunami, and the floods in New Orleans. I mean, all of that was quite suspicious.
If they're manipulating weather to do that, again, a huge cost to the U.S. Treasury to repair the damage. Is that why they're slow to react? I mean, New Orleans was a disaster, not so much because of the weather, but because of the lack of a response from the federal government.
Yeah, true. There's all kinds of theories on that too. I mean, arguably, the idea was to sort of experiment with their new FEMA techniques for going in and militarizing an area that was hit with a disaster.
Yes, because I remember the first federal responders who got there, U.S. Marines said, "We're not here to save you. We're here to preserve law and order." Wow.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that, but that's exactly what the sense I got from it.
Well, that's what I heard from Canadian first responders who went down to help. Our fire department sent people, and after they came under fire from snipers, they couldn't go out unless they had armed guards. But they didn't know who was shooting at them, and when they talked to the actual people, they had no idea who was shooting at the Canadians either.
Wow. Yeah, that's all very dark and frightening.
And also with the high-altitude research project HARP, the Russians and Chinese also want to do the same thing and may be trying to do the same thing. What would happen if all three of those manipulations hit and caused some kind of a super weather system that just couldn't stop?
Well, that certainly is a concern, and it's also secret that you can't even demand investigation and hearings and so forth, because they're still in denial where they say it's not happening. So I guess the first thing we have to do is to prove that it is happening. But you do hear about summits where they supposedly talk about these things, and there are, I think, aren't there international treaties that say that you can't manipulate the weather for military purposes? But now their argument for doing it, if they're doing it, is that they're doing it for global warming purposes, and then that itself is very controversial, whether there even is global warming, or whether it's something that needs to be fixed with a cloud of aluminum, or whether it's just a matter of whether things are just shifting around.
Well, I know in the 70s the Russians were experimenting with high-altitude radio frequencies that on the east coast of Canada were actually boring holes in the ground.
Wow.
Can you imagine if that sort of happened all over? It would be like bombs coming out of the sky, only it's the sky itself causing it.
Yeah. Yep, it's actually quite alarming. That's why I write, is to just alert people to these issues and the possibilities, and then I get into trouble. I mean, people then say that it's not true, or it's conspiracy theories. But there's so much data for it that something is going on.
And of course, the people who work on it, they're under the Official Secrets Act. They could go to jail for life if they said anything about it, or worse.
Yeah, or they'll just disappear.
Well, just like after the Roswell incident, people were told if you talk, that's a big desert, you're going to disappear out there if you keep talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and who's doing all that? It's not us. I mean, and I doubt it's even our elected officials. It's somebody manipulating things behind that. I mean, who knows who controls the military? Everything is secret in the military. So, and I heard Catherine Austin Fitts. She's had quite a bit of experience with that because she lost everything after she exposed the fact that billions of dollars had disappeared from the budget. You know, she was exposing the black budget. She was assistant Secretary of Housing under Reagan, I think. And so she was just doing her job, exposing these numbers, and all of a sudden, she was quite wealthy, and all of a sudden she lost her fortune. She was fired, of course, and that her life was in danger. She was on the run over this stuff, and so she now thinks that it's actually extraterrestrials. I mean, because she spent decades investigating what's going on, that it's not even us, like it's not even human, which is possible. Who knows? We're at that age where the internet gives you so much information. There's so much data for everything out there that it opens up wide possibilities for theories.
And of course, too, the government could say that this funding is being used to fund anti-terrorist activities, but they can't tell you exactly how.
Right. And the even fact that we have anti-terrorists, terrorism in the U.S. is such a small issue compared to, say, cancer. But cancer research is not a huge secret. And they don't put as much money into cancer research. Or actually, I think conventional medicine is now the third leading cause of death, but they don't put a lot of time into investigating the side effects of drugs, which are terrible. I think that kills more people than anything else. But the fact that once in a blue moon there's a terrorist incident that may be artificially, it may be a false flag operation, for all we know, justifies this massive security state. But we can see all that, but what can we do about it? That's the issue. So I think where they get their power is that originally where they get the power is that they, whoever they is, the bankers, let's say, starting with the bankers, have the power to create money. So money is created privately, and we, including governments, are all in debt to big money created privately. And that the way we could get our power back, ultimately, is to get back the power to create money, which we're obviously not going to be able to do at the federal level. So we need to start at the state level or the local level and set up our own communities that are essentially self-sufficient.
We'll have more with Ellen Brown right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Ellen Brown, attorney, author, investigator, and a person who would like to see the public banking system returned to the public. You also mentioned in Canada the lawsuit where Canadians are trying to get the Bank of Canada back in the hands of the people so the bank could lend you money at the prime rate of 0.75% instead of what the banks charge you, right?
Right. That's a great lawsuit that's been going on for a while by Comer, the Committee for Monetary Reform. And they're actually making headway. I mean, at least it hasn't gotten dismissed out on the pleadings, which you would have suspected it might have done. So they're being allowed to go forward with their case, which means they may be able to force they're suing the Bank of Canada to lend directly to the government, which is what used to happen between 1939 and 1974. The government borrowed directly from its own central bank, which just created the money on I guess we didn't have computers then, but anyway, just created the money on the books and lent it to the government. And these were for many productive things, so it was easy enough to pay those loans back, particularly since they were interest-free. Since the government owned the bank, the government gets the interest back. So during that period, many things were accomplished, the St. Lawrence Seaway and your great healthcare system. It was the great then. I guess it's slid since because it's not funded like it used to be. Roadways, seaways, social services, education, etc. And then in 1974, they changed the system. They quit doing that because supposedly we were in this phase called stagflation, where prices were going up, but jobs were there was still joblessness. The economy was not thriving, and that was blamed on governments just printing the money. But in fact, governments, or not just Canada, but other governments were borrowing directly from their own central bank, like France was one. New Zealand did it for a while, and it wasn't creating inflation. In fact, what was creating the inflation in the 1970s was that we went off the gold standard in 1971. The dollar immediately plummeted, and some big bankers got together along with Henry Kissinger in Sweden, apparently, and arranged to force the cost of oil up so that the dollar, instead of being backed by gold, would then be backed by oil. So they made a deal with the OPEC countries that they would sell their oil only in dollars, and the dollars would be deposited in London and Wall Street banks. Apparently, Henry Kissinger went to the Saudis and said, we are going to make you very rich. We are going to quadruple the price of oil, and in return, you will sell your oil only in dollars and put it in our banks, which is what happened. So that was one thing, driving up the price of oil, and so many countries that thought they had the dollar reserves they needed didn't, so they were forced to borrow from U.S. and London banks. And then there was the fact of there was cost-push inflation, because at that point unions were very strong, so they would negotiate the wages up, and then the employers and the unions kept competing with each other, driving prices up. I can't remember. There were several other reasons. Then the interest rates went way up. So the idea was that if you increase the interest rates, you will reduce borrowing, and then that would prevent inflation by causing the money supply to shrink. But that's not what happened. Driving the interest rate up was just another form of cost-push inflation, where producers had to add that extra cost of interest to their costs, and that drove up the price of their products. So it was it was bad economic theory. It was a Milton Friedman theory, that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, meaning that it's always created by printing money, but it wasn't. And Milton Friedman's whole theories were discounted thereafter, but we never went back to borrowing from our own central banks. So that's what that lawsuit's all about, that it's actually in the Bank of Canada charter that they can lend directly to the government, and they're not doing it, although they're authorized to do it.
Ellen, how frustrating is it for you to find out about these various things and then finding out that the mechanisms to correct them aren't there?
Well, for me personally, I know some people get really upset about those things, but I'm a writer, and to me it's just all grist for the mill. I mean, I'm actually optimistic. I'm not really sure why. I guess because it seems to me there are two things going on. And on the top, you have this very oppressive, dark machine that's trying to crush us. But why? It's because they've lost control, and so they're going to these radical measures, including this whole militarization of everything, to regain control. But underneath, you have the internet, and you have all these communities sprouting up that are trying different experimental things. We're pushing for public banks, and hopefully we'll get some at some point. And there are other countries, like even just look at Greece. Look at they're in terrible straits at the moment. Or Iceland hit the skids, went into they had a terrible banking crisis, but then they nationalized the banks, and now they're leveling off and pulling out of it and experimenting with new ideas. And Greece is liable to start experimenting with something new because they can't work out the old with the EU. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any budging there by the Eurozone with their demands, the Troika. So Greece is liable to start experimenting with, I mean, they're liable to leave the Eurozone and issue their own money again. And they could do it with publicly owned banks where they would issue a currency. I saw that Varoufakis was talking about, the finance minister was talking about doing a Bitcoin type, not that he would do Bitcoin, but using this sort of algorithm that was developed for Bitcoin to issue a digital currency that would effectively be an advance against future taxes, that's what money really is, or what it used to be when the American colonists issued paper scrip. It was supposedly an advance against taxes, and that's what the tally system was in England, the original sort of government-issued money where they would give you a stick. You would pay goods and services ahead of time, and then they would notch the stick, and you would get half the stick, showing that you had paid, and then you could use that, and it was discounted, so maybe you would pay, you would get 100%, but it was only 80% worth of goods that you had actually delivered, so in effect you would get interest on your advance of taxes, and then you could use that stick for taxes, but the stick would circulate, so it had value because anybody could use the stick to pay their taxes, and that was the origin of what you could call paper money or government-issued money, other than a gold coin that was supposedly actually worth the value of that was stamped on it.
Well, Ellen, I think the government is giving us the stick, but it's not going to where I think we would like it to go.
Yeah, I have to agree.
Ellen, thank you very much. Is there a website people can go to find out more about the research you've done?
My blog is ellenbrown.com, and then the Public Banking Institute website is publicbankinginstitute.org.
Thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been Ellen Brown, author, attorney, and a huge supporter of the public banking system. Her website, ellenbrown.com. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Check out our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Net. We're also on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Questions or comments about the show can be sent to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.